Okay, so these are the last things, and we just added straight keyframes to this piece, very linear keyframes, and which means that our animations are a little flat. They all happen, this object goes from a dead stop here, it just scales up, and there's no true interaction here. There's no true effect that's taking place. And so one of the things is if you look at this scale, instead of it just snapping right away, what if it eased into that final corner? So here I can right click on a keyframe and I can use the keyframe assistant and say, okay, ease into this keyframe. The keyframe itself, the icon changes a little bit to let us know there's an ease, and look at how it affects it. This might be a little hard to see here because it happens quickly. May actually happen too quickly. Let me expand this a little bit and let it take a little more time just so we can see it. So it took a little more time there. Oh, if you're previewing, one of the cool things you can do is I can grab these handles here, my work area. Grab the handle on the end. And now when I preview, it'll only preview that space. You'll see it'll keep going again and again. So this piece actually now it changes a little bit of how it snaps into place. We can apply that to here as well. Now we get this smoother movement. The other thing to look at is there's a thing called motion blur. And motion blur is what happens when things move fast and our eyes don't need to see every single component of it. And if I advance through here, you'll see that at every size, these letters all look good and the shape of this thing. That's not really how our eyes work. So we can turn on motion blur. There's a little thing over here. It says motion blur simulates shutter distortion or duration. If I turn it on here, and then here I have to make sure that I enable motion blur. And if you don't have a lot of RAM on your machine, this will slow down your rendering, so you want to do this when you get to near the end of the project. If I turn on motion blur, and now look at how much blurring there is. And now these pieces go from, it blurs all the way up into position. And if I preview that now, it has a much softer effect to it. The nice thing about the motion blur is we can apply it to anything, any layer that has animation on it. So let's look to see, is there motion blur on the orange part? Looks like it just popped on, right? So let's go back to our room service, or I'm sorry, our main menu. We want to select this piece here. We want to turn on its motion blur. And now, notice that there's a blur when those things move on. And if we wanted to go deeper with this, we could go down to here and grab our white bar and turn it on for our white bar. And then when it's moving between positions, there's a slight blur. It's not moving very far or very fast, so the blur is minimal. But by turning on the motion blur, by adding keyframe ease ins to these, we get a much smoother project. And here I'll play it. So there it is. That's just an extra component that you can add. Remember, when we add our motion blur, you have to turn it on for the level, the layer, and then you have to make sure that it's enabled in this options panel for the composition window itself. Without this, you've turned on motion blur, but you've told the composition window not to draw any of the motion. So here, let me show you. If I scrub back here, there's my motion blur. If I do not enable it, even though I have it checked here, it still looks hard edges here. All right, so that's the last component of this, and these are all things that'll be helpful for this project and for the next project. All right,